So we are continuing our sermon series on courage. I have been looking at stories from the Old and New Testament, and today we're going to be once again in an Old Testament classic story of the Hebrew Scriptures from the book of Daniel. Our story today takes place during what is known as the Babylonian exile, and you probably remember their awesome names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I'll warn you, I'm going to say these names a lot over the next 15 minutes. Someone in the last service suggested I just call them the three amigos, but I'm going to stick with the names in the Bible, so just hang with me. And before I read our passage, I do want to just remind you of what has transpired in our story, so you have a glimpse of the context here. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were some of Israel's best and brightest. They were a part of the noble court, and they were educated, they were privileged. And then King Nebuchadnezzar, or King Neb, as I like to call him, invaded Israel, and Israel loses. They invaded the land of Judah and began this whole deportation process known as the Babylonian exile. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were truly part of the lucky ones. They were part of King Neb's new noble court. So they just switched to a different empire. But things were different. Things were different. They were in a new place. They were in a new culture. They were learning a new language. A new religion was all around them. And in fact, their names were not even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were their Babylonian names. They had this whole new identity. And so they are adjusting to life. They are trying to survive, as any would do in this tough political circumstance. And there is a moment in the story that Daniel shares where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are invited to a royal dinner at the royal palace. And things get a little tricky because they don't want to eat the king's food because it's not kosher. So they simply ask to eat water and vegetables. And King Neb obliges that request, thinking it's sort of amusing, like, oh, they're still hanging out with their old ways and their old food habits. But then things change when King Neb decides to build himself a gold statue. This thing is huge, 9 feet by 90 feet tall. He invites all the rulers from all around his kingdom to come to a special dedication ceremony. He gets a big band ready to play, and at a certain cue, everyone is supposed to bow down and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. So, just to be clear that the stakes were, King Neb's has a big fiery furnace ready to go. So everybody knows that if you do not choose to bow down and worship this golden statue, there will be a price. So everyone comes, the crowd is there, the band plays, and at a certain cue, when everybody else bows down, that's when the three are noticed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are still standing tall in this crowd of people that are bowing down. The trusted royal servants, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow down to the statue. And King Neb is frankly devastated by this. They have become some of his trusted advisors at this point. So he is so upset that they are not bowing down, he even gives them a second chance. He thinks maybe they missed the music cue. You know, they're not from around here. Maybe they didn't realize what they were supposed to do. So he gives them a second chance. And this is when I'm going to pick up reading. And when I start reading, this is King Nebuchadnezzar speaking, giving them this second chance. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 15 in Daniel. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, an entire musical ensemble to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the furnace of blazing fire. And then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, Was it not 3 men that threw bound into the fire? They answered the king, True, O king. He replied, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Whew. So, here's what I've been wondering this week. Frankly, we'll probably never have an answer to this, but I can't help but wonder. I wonder if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were somehow strengthened because they had each other. Would we even been talking about this story if it was just one of them? Because they had so much of their life had been turned upside down. New names, new identity, new culture, new language, but they had each other, this small little fragment of community. You know, last week's sermon on courage, someone gave me a quote from Billy Graham, and it said, Courage is contagious. When a brave person takes a stand, the backs of others are often stiffened. Maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons we still tell this story is because they took courage from one another. It's a reminder to me of the power and strength of community, even church at its best. And even if you have a small one, even if you feel like you only have 1 or 2 people in your life who truly help you not to do this life alone, then consider yourself blessed. If you have those people who help you live your own life more bravely and courageously, then thank God for those people in your life. Even tell them that they are those people in your life. You can just come up to them one day and say, guess what? You are my Meshach to my Abednego. We're doing this thing together. They might be confused by that, but you'll know what you mean. take strength and courage from the people who help us live our lives more courageously. So where do these three get their courage to keep standing when the whole world around them is bowing down? You know, when I picture their story, I always think of this famous picture from history. If you don't know about this picture, this is from a Nazi rally in 1936, and that guy in the middle of the circle is the one person in this picture who's not raising his hands. In fact, if you've never seen it, Google it, because there is quite an interesting history around this picture. But I think of moments like this. Where did these three find the courage to keep standing? Years ago, a pastor told me that whenever he writes a sermon, the way he goes about it is he simply asks himself one question, and he asks himself, where is the good news in this story? Where's the good news? And I think that maybe at some point in my life, I might have just stood up here in front of everybody and said, the good news of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is that if you stay true to your faith, then God will save you. God will protect you. I think there was a time I would have said that. But the truth is, I see it differently now. You know, these three men formerly known as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, managed to keep standing tall when the world told them, you better bow down or else. How'd they do that? Think for a moment just what their context truly was. Their home was a distant memory, their language and culture gone, their faith community scattered to the wind. At this point, they are years removed from all of it. Unlike 1936, nobody was going to be there to snap a picture of them bowing down. Nobody would go run and tell their mama what they did. Nobody would have to know. Nobody would have to know. Truth is, they're not even in prison for their faith. They are living and working in the royal palace. They are comfortable. Life is looking pretty good. They didn't have to do it. They were some of the king's most trusted men. All they had to do, see, I'm really good at rationalizing. All they had to do was this one little thing. Break that one commandment, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Well, there's 9 other commandments. Maybe they can do really good at those 9 other ones for a while, and they'll be fine. Oh, just that one commandment. Everyone else is doing it. Have you ever tried that with your parents? Everyone else is going. Everyone else is doing it. All they had to do, the pressure was enormous. Just bow down this one time and worship the golden statue or die. Just break one commandment or die. I personally cannot imagine stakes like that. The choice was incredibly brutal. When I used to leave the house, I would always hear one thing: remember who you are. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not forget. They remembered. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, in the midst of enormous pressure, they remembered who they were. So where is the good news in this story? What if the good news of this story is stay true to your faith? Period. Stay true to your faith, no matter the cost, whether you are saved or not saved in that fiery furnace. Because if you notice in our story, these 3 didn't say, hey, King Neb, you can try to throw us in there, but it's not going to work. You're about to fail. They don't say that. They make no such proclamations. They do say God could choose to save us, but no matter what happens, we aren't going to worship you. They truly believed, frankly, that there were worse things than death. And they stepped into that fire choosing to stay true to their faith. remembering who they are, choosing a God who would be with them in that fiery furnace. That is courage. And as a pastor, I truly have witnessed courage just like that, again and again. You know, I remember a woman in my church years ago. She was headed in for a very big exploratory surgery. She had been in the hospital for about a week, and they had been trying to figure out what was going on. And essentially, the surgeon had said, we won't fully know until we do this operation. But things were looking very risky and very uncertain. And I went by to see her before her surgery. And I don't know why I asked it that particular day, but I asked her before I prayed what she would like me to pray for. And I still remember what she said. Pray for my kids and my grandkids, because whatever happens tomorrow, my life is in God's hand, and I'm not worried about a thing. My life is in God's hands, and I know that. But pray for my kids today. Where'd she get courage like that? She remembered. She remembered. And maybe you and I will not have the same choices as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I hope no one will ever ask us to choose between a golden statue or a fiery furnace. For most of us, our choices look a whole lot different, but all our choices come with a cost. They still have a cost. And every day, in big ways and small ways, we decide who we are and the God we proclaim to follow. In the words we use, and how we spend our dollars, and how we spend our time, on how we share our gifts or our talents, and the things we do and the things we leave undone, we decide. Moments big and small, we choose again and again who we are and who we want to follow. Will we choose the God who's with us through the fire? Let's pray. Gracious and holy God, we confess to you that sometimes our lives also look pretty good, pretty easy, pretty comfortable. And we forget that we too are asked to make choices about the people we want to be in the world today and the God we proclaim to follow. So give us courage to choose you. Give us courage to choose the faith in Jesus Christ, who calls us to be his hands and feet in the world. Amen.